And here he asks the question, back to the book, why did most men in Reserve Police Battalion 101 become killers while only a minority of perhaps 10% and certainly no more than 20% did not? A number of explanations have been invoked in the past to explain such behavior: wartime brutalization, racism, segmentation and routinization of the task, special selection of the perpetrators, careerism, obedience to orders, deference to authority, ideological indoctrination, and conformity. These factors are applicable in varying degrees, but none without qualification. So he's trying to now figure out why these people did what they did. And that's a list of all the kind of excuses or reasons, I should say, of why these men behave this way. Talks a little bit about overall kind of war crimes here. Back to the book. Many of the most notorious wartime atrocities, the Japanese rampage through Manila, the American slaughter of prisoners and mutilation of corpses on many of the Pacific Islands, and the massacre at My Lai, involved a kind of battlefield frenzy. Soldiers who were inured to violence, numb to the taking of human life, embittered over their own casualties, and frustrated by the tenacity of an insidious and seemingly inhuman enemy, sometimes exploded and at other times grimly resolved to have their revenge at first opportunity. So that's one type. For me, what's that called when you like non-premeditated murder?
Yeah.
Right? Like just, the guy comes home and his wife's with some other guy and boom, he goes battlefield frenzy.
Yeah.
That's one kind. Now we talk about this premeditated. Back to the book. Other kinds of atrocity, lacking the immediacy of the battlefield frenzy and fully expressing official government policy, decidedly were standard operating procedures. The firebombing of German and Japanese cities, the enslavement and murderous maltreatment of foreign laborers in German camps and factories or along the Siam-Burma Railroad, the reprisal shooting of 100 civilians for every German soldier killed by partisan attack in Yugoslavia or elsewhere in Eastern Europe. These were not the spontaneous explosions or cruel revenge of brutalized men, but the methodical executed policies of government. Both kinds of atrocities occur in the brutalizing context of war, but the men who carry out atrocity by policy are in a different state of mind. They act not out of frenzy, bitterness, and frustration, but with calculation. Clearly, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, in implementing the systematic Nazi policy of exterminating European Jewry, belong in the second category. Except for a few of the oldest men who were veterans of World War I and a few NCOs who had been transferred from Poland from Russia, the men of the battalion had not seen battle or encountered a deadly enemy. Most of them had not fired a shot in anger or even been fired upon, much less lost comrades in fighting at their side. Thus, wartime brutalization through prior combat was not an immediate experience directly influencing the policeman's behavior at Yosifov. Once the killing began, however, the men became increasingly brutalized. As in combat, the horrors of the initial encounter eventually became routine, and the killing became progressively easier. In this sense, brutalization was not the cause, but the effect of the men's behavior. So he's kind of saying, look, like what you said, these guys aren't fighting an enemy. They hadn't lost their buddy. They're not they're not avenging their buddy that got killed next to them, blown up by an IED, and now they're going to take it out on this group that they capture. It's not like that. Back to the book. As John Dower has observed, the dehumanization of the other contributed immeasurably to the psychological distancing that facilitated killing. Distancing, not frenzy and brutalization, is one of the keys to the behavior of the Reserve Police Battalion 101. War and negative racial stereotyping were two mutually reinforcing factors in this distancing. So, in order to kill these people, you got to distance yourself from them. You can't see them as human. You can't see them as people. Many scholars of the Holocaust, especially Raoul Hilberg, have emphasized the bureaucratic and administrative aspects of the destruction process. This is very interesting. This approach emphasizes the degree to which modern bureaucratic life fosters a functional and physical distancing in the same way that war and negative racial stereotype promote a psychological distancing between perpetrator and victim. So you form this bureaucratic machine that you're only a little piece of it. All you're doing is collecting people. All you're doing is putting them in trains. You're not killing anybody.
Yeah.
All you're doing is rounding them up. All you're doing is guarding them as they're getting pushed down into the graves. That's not you.
Yeah.
It's a big bureaucratic machine. You're just a little piece of it. Back to the book. Indeed, many of the perpetrators of the Holocaust were so-called desk murderers, whose role in the mass extermination was greatly facilitated by the bureaucratic nature of their participation. Their jobs frequently consisted of tiny steps in the overall killing process, and they performed them in routine manner, never seeing the victims' their actions affected. Segmented, routinized, and depersonalized, the job of the bureaucrat or specialist, whether it involved confiscating property, scheduling trains, drafting legislation, sending telegrams, or compiling lists, could be performed without confronting the reality of mass murder. Such a luxury, of course, was not enjoyed by the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, who were quite literally saturated in the blood of victims shot at point-blank range. No one confronted the reality of mass murder more directly than the men in the woods of Yosifov. Segmentation and routinization, the depersonalizing aspects of the bureaucratized killing cannot explain the battalion's initial behavior there. So again, he's saying, look, that makes sense. You turn this into a big bureaucratic thing, but that's not what happened here with these guys. The facilitating psychological effect of a division of labor for the killing process was not totally negligible, however. So then he talks about the fact that they did make those adjustments and take the killing out of their hands somewhat. And that did make it easier for them. Now, he talks about, one of the things that he mentioned early on and why this happened, he talks about special selection of the right people. Well, that doesn't really hold true either, because here we go. Back to the book. The case for special selection of officers is even more difficult to make. By SS standards, Major Trapp was a patriotic German, but traditionally and overly sentimental. What in Nazi Germany was scornfully considered both weak and reactionary. So you can't say it was the selection of people, and we already talked about all the different types of normal people that were doing this. They didn't pull some truck driver in Hamburg out and said that's 38 years old and say this guy's going to be the perfect. No, they didn't do that. Back to the book. Reserve Police Battalion was not sent to Lublin to murder Jews because it was composed of men specifically selected or deemed particularly suited for the task. On the contrary, the battalion was the dregs of the manpower pool available at that stage of war. It was employed to kill Jews because it was the only kind of unit available for such behind-the-line duties. Many studies of Nazi killers suggested a different kind of selection, namely self-selection to the party and the SS by unusually violence-prone people. Shortly after the war, Theodor Adorno and many others developed the notion that there's an authoritarian personality. So they started looking at there's certain people that are susceptible to having this type of personality. They made up something called the F scale, which is like your propensity to have a authoritarian personality. Here's some of the ingredients there. Back to the book. Rigid adherence to conventional values, submissiveness to authority figures, aggressiveness toward outgroups, opposition to introspection, reflection, and creativity, a tendency to superstition and stereotyping, preoccupation with power and toughness, destructiveness and cynicism. So these are the kind of things that they're saying that these types of personalities would become Nazis because that's the type of personality they have. There's another, like, kind of to make this as simple as possible, a guy named Zygmunt Bauman has summed up this approach as follows. Nazism was cruel because Nazis were cruel, and the Nazis were cruel because cruel people tended to become Nazis. Again, these are theories. I don't think you can apply that to a truck driver from Hamburg that got drafted. They didn't even self-select for. They got drafted. They got told, okay, you need to be in the army here, or in the police battalion.
It's almost like it's not necessarily, a person being a truck driver is like, this exclusionary occupation. It's more like, just because they're a truck driver, it just doesn't mean anything. It's like that's not the factor. The factor is something else.
Anything when they talked about all these people from Hamburg, anything that they talk about, none of those. It's not like we got a bunch of guys that were that worked in a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
Like we're going to recruit all these people from a slaughterhouse. No, we didn't recruit hunters. We didn't. They didn't recruit football players because they're aggressive. No, it was just random any job, and they showed up there. So, basically what I'm getting out of this is he's saying, like, no, it's like you can't really say it's that either,
right?
Because it's just a waiter and a salesperson.
But at the same time, the guy who's a waiter could have these other qualities, like how you're talking.
Yeah, but you take 500 people from Hamburg between the ages of 35 and 40, you're not going to find that like all these guys had those kind of fascist qualities about them.
Right.
Not happening.
Yeah, man. It's crazy.
Some people become, this is Erwin Staub accepts the notion that some people become perpetrators as a result of their personality. They are self-selected. And he says that under particular circumstances, most people have a capacity for extreme violence and the destruction of human life. It's an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Under certain circumstances, everyone has a propensity for violence. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's people that would argue that in all different directions. But, you take a middle-aged woman that's never been in a fist fight before, and you have somebody attack her child that's going to kill or harm their child, I think you can see a propensity for violence from a lot of them.
Yeah.
Maybe even a very, 99%?
Sure.
I'm going to say 99%.
I'll go with that too, yeah.
Yeah, 99%. If it's a middle-aged woman who has someone that's about to severely hurt or kill their child, and their way to stop it is with a pistol.
Right.
My assessment is we're going to 99% of that perpetrators getting killed.
Yeah, like with specific effort towards like the violent part of it. You know how like I'm not saying on a movie necessarily, but that old thing. Well, let's say imagine a scenario like that where the lady's gonna shoot this guy because the guy's attacking the kid or something. It won't be like, oh, let me do the bare minimum force, to eliminate the threat. She's probably gonna be she'll go overboard killing that guy.
Gonna kill him extra.
Yeah, because that's kind of the violence coming out of someone. It's one thing to do it because I'm scared and oh my gosh, get away from me kind of thing. That's not violence.
Yeah.
So that's really the question when you consider a middle-aged girl, having a propensity for violence.
I don't think she's going to do extra. I think she's going to kill him and go grab her kid and make sure her kid's safe.
Right.
I don't see this extra level, desecration of the body or anything like that. I just hey, I'm going to make my kid safe.
Yeah, so you're saying the propensity for violence in that case is just the mere act of killing the guy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But like I'm thinking of a movie for whatever reason.
Because that's all your brain is filled with.
But or television in general. But the girl, she's like scared. It's all done out of fear, And sure, it's almost like the violence is just happenstance. It's not her propensity for violence necessarily, but it's just the violence.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if you set up an experiment.
Yes.
Where you took a middle-aged group of women, and they had children, and you put them in a scenario where, it was either the kid dies or they kill the perpetrator.
Right.
Not like hey, I might be able to debate him out of it. No, The axe is in the air. It's going to be swung down on the kid.
Right.
You have to press this button to kill that guy.
Yeah, where violence is the choice.
Violence is the choice.
Yeah.
I think the propensity is going to be 99, and I'm going to go even higher.
Agree.
So then he gets into some of these real famous experiments, kind of sociological experiments. One of them is the Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. I'm sure you've heard of that. Everyone's heard of that, where they basically take people and divide them up and just randomly. And actually, I didn't know this because I never did any deep research on the study, but they kind of do a pre-screening to make sure that there's no extreme personalities. Everyone that was like, I mean, however you could frame the word normal, the people that participate in the experiment are just like normal people. They didn't have any extreme personalities.
Right.
Well, those kind of semi-normal people, they put them in that prison experiment, and sure enough, some people were made guards, some people were made prisoners, and they had to get them to do certain things, and there's a certain number. I mean, it didn't take long for the guards. I think it took 6 days. Some of the guards turned sadistic, evil, right? And here we go back to the book. Most dramatic and distressing to us was the observation of the ease with which sadistic behavior could be elicited in individuals who were not sadistic types. The prison situation alone, Zimbardo concluded, was a sufficient condition to produce aberrant antisocial behavior. That's from the guards. From the guards. So this is pretty scary. Another fact here pointed out about that. Only 2, i.e. less than 20%, emerged as good guards who did not punish prisoners even did small favors for them. So those numbers are pretty in line with this really small percentage of people that they're just good people.
Yeah.
Right? It's only 10 to 20%
of
actual good people. How does that make you feel about the human race? Not real good.
Yeah.
Not real good. All right. Another thing put out here, back to the book. Among the perpetrators, of course, orders have traditionally been most frequently cited explanation for their own behavior. So remember, orders are orders. Orders were orders, and no one in such a political climate could be expected to disobey them. They insisted. This is the guards. This is the police battalion saying, look, we were getting ordered to do this stuff. We were just following orders. We hear that all the time. Disobedience surely meant the concentration camp, if not immediate execution, possibly for their families as well. So they're saying, look, if we would ended up in the concentration camps ourselves if this had happened. Now, he points this out. Back to the book. There is a general problem with this explanation, however. Quite simply, in the past 45 years, no defense attorney or defendant in any of the hundreds of post-war trials has been able to document a single case in which refusal to obey an order to kill unarmed civilians resulted in the allegedly inevitable dire punishment. So there's no precedent for that. Now, I don't think that these guys out there in the battalion are sitting there thinking about this with a legal perspective, saying, well, actually there's no precedent for punishment being carried out on people that have been on. I think that's a stretch. I think that's a stretch.
Wait, when you're talking about maybe someone contemplating
he's
refusing,
saying, these guys that were saying I couldn't refuse the orders because I would get punished,
right?
And he's saying that there's no precedence,
right,
that you actually will get this severe punishment.
Right.
But how's when you're
in
someone out in the
situation,
field going to know that that's a precedence? You don't. You just think, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah, you're not thinking about the time you remember the guy that you heard of getting killed. You're not thinking of that. No. You're thinking about yourself.
And even more so, you're not thinking about the fact that you've never heard of that before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so we're talking about obedience of orders, and here we go back to the book. If obedience to orders out of fear of dire punishment is not a valid explanation, what about obedience to authority? In the more general sense, used by Stanley Milgram, deference simply as a product of socialization and evolution, a deeply ingrained behavior tendency to comply with the directives of those positioned hierarchically above them, even to the point of performing repugnant actions in violation of universally accepted moral norms. So you've heard of the Milgram experiments?
No.
These are kind of like the Stanford prison, pretty famous And what he did was he set up these experiments where you couldn't see, these actors were behind a wall, but they were getting asked questions, and if they answered the question wrong, they would get a little electric shock.
Yeah.
That was done by the person that was being experimented on.
Uh-huh.
So, they'd say, okay, Jocko, you got this guy, his name is Echo, he's over there, going to ask him a question. If he gets it wrong, you hit him with this shock. I can't see you, but I can hear you. So when I shock you, and every question that you get wrong, I have to escalate the level of shock. So it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And your reaction is more and more horrific as these things escalate.
Right. But you're the guy, the experiment is on, not me.
The experiment is on me. No, you're just an actor. There's no actual shock happening.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, and you're actually going through series of complaints, and I'll read this here. There was an escalating series of fake electric shocks upon a actor or victim who responded with carefully programmed voice feedback. An escalating series of complaints, cries of pain, call for help, and finally fateful silence. In the standard voice feedback experiment, 2/3 of Milgram's subjects were obedient to the point of inflicting extreme pain. Several variations on the experiment produced significantly different results. If the actor/victim was shielded so that the subject could hear and see no response, obedience was much greater. So if I couldn't hear you and I just knew that I was shocking the hell out of you, I was good with it. If the subject had both visual and voice feedback, compliance to the extreme fell to 40%. So down from 66% to 40%. If the subject had to touch the actor/victim physically by forcing his hand onto an electric plate to deliver the shocks, obedience dropped to 30%. Now this is fascinating. If a non-authority figure gave orders, obedience was nil. So if some guy was like, hey, I'm Bill, I'm running the experiment. Hey, shock this guy. If the guy was no authority, they got none.
No obedience.
So that shows you, and that's from a leadership perspective, that's very important to understand. Huh. It's important to understand how much influence you have when you're in a leadership position. And I run into this all the time, and I ran into it in the SEAL teams, when a guy doesn't recognize the power of his rank. And he doesn't recognize that just by wearing his rank, when he says something, people are kind of like gonna do it. They want to do it.
Right.
So then, going back to the book here, if the naive subject performed a subsidiary or accessory task but did not personally inflict the electric shocks, obedience was nearly total. So that goes down to the division of labor again. If it was just me saying, okay, I asked him a question, you have to shock him again, and some other guy was shocking you, I'd go straight to 100. Straight to 100.
Dang, bro.
In contrast, if the subject was part of an actor peer group that staged carefully planned refusal to continue to follow the directions of the authority figure, the vast majority of subjects, 90%, joined their peer group and desisted as well. So that's the tipping point thing. Yeah. If there was if it was 3 of us that were conducting the experiment on you, and I was the naive guy that doesn't know what's going on. I'm the one that they were actually doing the experiment on. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 actors that are in the room with me, and they're going to be like, hey, man, we shouldn't be doing this. And the other guy goes, yeah, man, that looks like it's really hurting me. We should stop this. Yeah. 90% of the time I go, yeah, you guys are right.
Yeah.
Psychology, group psychology. If the subject was given complete discretion as to the level of electric shock to administer, all but a few sadists consistently delivered a minimal shock. When not under direct surveillance of the scientist, many of the subjects cheated by giving lower shocks than prescribed, even though they were unable to confront authority and abandon the experiment. So they'd give lower shocks, but they wouldn't walk away from it. Right. They wouldn't just say, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. It's weird. So everyone's really, you know what it is? We're all just on the edge, man. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. Like, and we kind of need each other in that way too.
Well, it's again, this is about leadership. It's amazing how influential or how influenceable people are. They're so ready for influence. They're so ready to be told, like, hey man, we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we saw with the podcast on the My Lai massacre. All it took was one officer saying, stop killing. And everyone, okay, stop killing.
Right.
Everyone
That's
just
what I mean.
they just need to get nudged in that direction. And by the way, they had already been nudged in the other direction, which is kill everyone. And they said, okay, cool, we'll kill everyone.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by I don't mean on the edge of like saying nothing. I mean on the fence.
Yeah,
You know how
on the fence. That's
that-
why leadership is so important, because
Yeah.
you're walking around with people all over the world, and whatever position you're in, regardless if it's in a work environment, if it's a social environment, if it's with your friend or your peer group, you have so much power over people just by being a leader and by using that influence to work people one way or the other.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah, it is crazy. Going back to the book, to what were the vast majority of Trapp's men responding to when they did not step out? Was it the authority as represented by either Trapp or his superiors? Were they responding to Trapp not primarily as an authority figure, but as an individual, a popular and beloved officer who they would not leave in the lurch? What about other factors? Milgram himself notes that people far more frequently invoke authority than conformity to explain their behavior, for only the former seems to absolve them of personal responsibility. And he quotes here, subjects deny conformity and embrace obedience as the explanation of their actions. So people don't like to say, everyone else is doing it, so I
Right.
did it. People don't like to say that because that means I'm responsible for it. People don't like to take ownership of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have a book called Extreme Ownership. People don't like to take ownership of things. Right?
Yeah.
Instead, they want to say, as soon as I blame something on my boss, and this is one of the big things in extreme ownership leading up the chain of command, it's so easy to blame your boss because how can I control my boss?
I was following orders.
I was following orders. Boss told me to do this. That's why we failed the mission. I was told to do this. He didn't give me the right gear. That's what we hear this all the time.
Yeah.
And Milgram says it too. No one wants to say, hey, you know what? I decided I was just going to do what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
That's my decision. Instead, they put that decision on the other guy, on the boss man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another exploration here, back to the book. Direct proximity to the horror of killing significantly increased the number of men who would no longer comply. On the other hand, with the division of labor and removal of the killing process to the death camps, the men felt scarcely any responsibility at all for their actions. The same thing Milgram figured out. If I got someone else that's pressing the button over there that's shocking you, I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Keep rolling. Now, one thing that Milgram kind of talks about is the kind of indoctrination, or what kind of ideological justification did he give to his people? It's really just pre-existing in Milgram's experiments. These are just kind of normal people. So what about with the Nazis? And what kind of indoctrination did they get? Brainwashed, right? I've talked about this a little bit already, but back to the book. All order police battalions were to be strengthened in character and ideology. One topic for the first week, they went through like a school and education, ideological education. One topic for the first week was race as the basis of our worldview, followed by the second week, maintaining the purity of blood. So there you go. These guys are being indoctrinated, but the reason that argument doesn't really hold much weight is because of the way who the people were. And back to the book, whatever the merits of such an argument, it clearly does not hold for the predominantly middle-aged men of Reserve Police Battalion 101. They were educated and spent their formative years in the pre-1933 period. Many came from a social milieu that was relatively unreceptive to National Socialism. They knew perfectly well the moral norms of German society before the Nazis. So you can't really blame it on them being brainwashed. So here's how Browning wraps up this book. I'm going to close it out. The behavior of any human being is, of course, a very complex phenomenon, and the historian who attempts to explain it is indulging in a certain arrogance. When nearly 500 men are involved to undertake any general explanation of their collective behavior is even more hazardous. What then is one to conclude? Most of all, one comes away from the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 with a great unease. This story of ordinary men is not the story of all men. The reserve policemen faced choices, and most of them committed terrible deeds. But those who killed cannot be absolved by the notion that anyone in the same situation would have done as they did, for even among them, some refused to kill and others stopped killing. Human responsibility is ultimately an individual matter. At the same time, however, the collective behavior of Reserve Police Battalion 101 has deeply disturbing implications. There are many societies afflicted by traditions of racism and caught in the siege mentality of war or threat of war. Everywhere society conditions people to respect and defer to authority, and indeed could scarcely function otherwise. Everywhere people seek career advancement. In every modern society, the complexity of life and the resulting bureaucratization and specialization attenuate the sense of personal responsibility of those implementing official policy. Within virtually every social collective, the peer group exerts tremendous pressures on behavior and sets moral norms. If the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 could become killers under such circumstances, what group of men cannot?